Okay, item 6 keeps us on the edge of our seats. Oh, National Public Safety Broadband.
No pressure.
Yeah.
Okay, after that resounding introduction. All right, and we'll go through the outline. Since we last met, the FirstNet board was appointed. They appointed 4 public safety representatives. Legislation only required 3, so that was a healthy sign because they might actually pay attention to public safety needs. Also, a couple of days later, the NTIA posted their preliminary grant guidance for the SIEC grant process. That's the state and local implementation planning grant. Their recommendations were to show that you've established or adjusted your governance structure to incorporate and plan for the national public safety broadband network in your state. Develop procedures to assure representation from local and tribal entities. Create your education and outreach process and show that you know what you're doing. They hope to get some idea of the public safety users that might adopt the system. So it's kind of like a cry for please, please, please jump on board kind of thing. And then recommended developing standardized MOUs and IGAs to simplify and streamline the process for permits, rights of way, and other legal issues within the state. And then develop your staffing plan for the outreach and data collection. What they preliminary notion is they want to do it in 2 phases, one for education and outreach, probably a little survey, gathering data points. And then for the real data collection on infrastructure sharing and so on and so forth, they wanted to go to a phase 2 to give FirstNet some time to develop their standards, because if you're getting information from 50 states, you kind of want a standard format and standards so that you can actually look at it as a nationwide level and get a sense of what's going on. Because if everybody started collecting data in their own way and figured out what was important to them, it might not be as helpful. So from an Arizona perspective, we run through here real quick. The establishment of governance structure, we have already gone through that process. In other words, we're using what we have in place with PSCC, the SIEC, and the PSIC office as the responsible parties in getting this done. And then we're working on a plan to cover the middle 3 bullet points there in terms of the procedures and education outreach. So want to run through that. If we take a look at the overall picture from the National Public Safety Broadband Network perspective, neither the $134 million that's part of the SIEC grant process nor the $7 billion appear to be enough to cover what we need in terms of analysis or build out. So the key word is figure out how you're going to be conscientious and creative in your financing and sharing of resources. Arizona has multiple initiatives in the hopper that are being managed at the state level through the CIO's office and through ASSET. There are initiatives on health, education, government, and public safety. All will be requiring fiber backhaul. The public safety broadband network, one of the key elements of that will be some, pervasive backhaul capability. So they'll all require education and outreach programs, and each discipline has its own message to get across, but common to all of them is how are we going to build the infrastructure and how the infrastructure is going to be developed. So the Digital Arizona program, which is the state's SBI State Broadband Initiative program that was part of the incentive programs put forth nationally, federally. They have developed a plan to build out conduit throughout the state, and in so doing reduce the cost for private entities to pull fiber through that conduit. In other words, it's too, relatively, there's not a return on investment for them to do it themselves, but if they don't have to go through the EPA and the right-of-way and all that stuff, if the conduit's available, then more likely would they build out in more rural areas than they have now. So they were able to get a piece of legislation passed, State Bill 1402, which allows the Department of Transportation to treat information just like it does cars and trucks. In other words, it can facilitate the movement of information on state and county roads. And by doing that, they would build out or allow conduit to be built out on their rights-of-way, and then therefore making it cheaper for private enterprise to actually get broadband out in the more rural areas. All right, so they've identified approximately 3,000 miles of state and county roads with a 40-mile swath on either side, because that's where they figure they can get broadband coverage. And in so doing, they'll cover 98% of the population. And in my mind, thinking about public safety, that's about where we would like to be for public safety as well. So not that you've filled in all the gaps or anything, but at least it's a stake in the sand. Each segment's been identified, and they're currently identifying anchor points, whether they be schools or police departments, fire departments that are associated with those particular segments, and developing an ROI model. What's the population, what kind of critical infrastructure is around there, and what and other metrics in terms of what value it has in terms of getting fiber loops built or backhaul to Tier 1 facilities, which are the national level pipelines for the broadband fiber. So the plan would be to bury and lease the conduit, allowing, again, private providers more viable markets. And actually, FirstNet could become one of those leasing agents eventually. So that's kind of the basis of where Digital Arizona is going. And then our plan would be to kind of, given that framework, hang our outreach and education around that to identify, if we go down to the third bullet point, for example, State Route 260 between 89A and 87, 47 miles. It's got a certain COG, certain regional education center, RAC, Western RAC, EMS agents. So to identify those regional governance structures that are associated with that, make sure we have contact points identified. So as we do our outreach and education, we actually do have people by name as close as we can get, and document that they've actually heard the message. So that way we can show from a guidance standpoint that we've actually covered the grant's intent. All right, so this kind of joint approach will allow for real positive and real definitive tracking of our efforts. All right, so as we go through, the OEC has developed a survey, and we're taking a look there. It's in draft mode, let's say, and they're working it as they piloted it in Oregon, and they're working through it in, I think, another 2 states, and so they're getting it honed down to, what information gathering makes sense. So we're probably going to be leveraging that survey as well. We've got a broadband TA that we'll probably be utilizing to work through this. And then as we go, we'll develop more and more metrics about what information we need in terms of infrastructure sharing and so forth. Okay, good point. Any discussion on the education outreach approach?
Michael, just a quick question.
Sure.
When they say when FirstNet's looking at shared assets, do you know if their expectation is, let's say City of Phoenix decides we're going to share some assets with them? How do they intend to offset that in the overall cost recovery model? Is the expectation you're going to share these assets for the greater good, or is the expectation of there's going to be some
Horse trading.
Yeah, are we going to barter on this and switch back and forth?
We haven't heard anything, in writing, okay, but my sense would be that you're going to reduce your monthly fee by sharing assets and, so that, since this is fee-based, and if you say, well, okay, we don't have any assets, go ahead and build it for us and then we'll pay whatever, then that's going to be kind of like your baseline maximal amount. But if half the assets were provided by the state or local jurisdiction or whatever, then you would expect some kind of in-kind on the fees. But we don't know for sure at all. That's just
I've been thinking through the logistics of that. That's going to be a complete disaster, because if you're sharing with, 90 different jurisdictions within a state, you're going to have to negotiate what cost share or what trading you're going to do. They're going to be wrapped up for decades trying to figure out what a fair trade is on that, and I just didn't know what their intentions were to get over that.
Well, and
we can't even do it among ourselves.
Yeah, we know each other, and we like each other.
Right.
We go to lunch together.
Well,
yeah.
And frankly, FirstNet and NTIA may be hoping to leave that up to the state to figure it out.
Good luck.
Not.
I was just curious if they had alluded to that, because I see that just from my prior history and governance discussions.
So that's been an issue?
That's been the biggest problem.
There's been previous initiatives to get fiber out to every community. My previous job in a rural county, that was one of the big projects.
Right.
In fact, are they planning to use the same highway, or they want a new separate highway so that the president can shut off the internet? Where's this going?
I'm just saying what we're trying to do in Arizona. Okay. Now, when the Digital Arizona program put together the map, they did not include federal highways because they didn't know where that was going to go. Since then, the initiatives come down through the administration that, yes, federal highways should play nice and share rights of way and infrastructure. So they haven't worked that back into their plan. Okay. FirstNet did hold its inaugural meeting. I say inaugural because FirstNet's first meeting gets a little tongue-tied. And as a result of that meeting, a couple of things. They established two committees, the Public Safety Advisory Committee, which is made up of SAFECOM members. They haven't identified exactly who, but the majority people will be from SAFECOM. And then the SIEC committee, and membership on that is TBD. Two of the members of the board introduced conceptual, kind of high-level approaches to the network design and also to how they handle application development. As a result of those presentations, NTIA has issued a notice of inquiry to receive input on those approaches. My initial observation is they're fine at a high level, but they're really not geared towards rural. They're mostly geared towards urban, and then there's issues upon how we're going to consistently utilize the applications and not end up with pockets of the western approach versus the eastern approach versus the different sections of the country and then have interoperability issues before we know it. So, we are going to respond to the notice of inquiry through the working group, the Arizona Public Safety Broadband Network Working Group, and I encourage anyone who has gone through that and has opinions, please contact us so we can work that into our response. Okay? And I open that up to people in general. All right? Because that gives some idea of what the FirstNet board, the way they're thinking about how this can be built out. All right, and then just a couple of notes. The Npsbn is still working on the statement of requirements. They're going into their final round of edits starting October 12th. Should be another month and a half, 2 months before that gets published and put out for general comment. And then the Utilities Telecom Council had a meeting here in Tempe, and we were part of a panel discussion on what options are available, possible between the Public Safety Broadband Network and the utilities. And basically it's just information gathering and discussion about what's possible now in terms of what infrastructure they have and what their wishes and needs might be in terms of public safety spectrum. Because apparently they're fairly spectrum poor. But again, it's all just discussion right now. All right, and then I, as part of this presentation, basically put up the project plan again. It hasn't really changed. And then on the timeline, we've got 2 check marks on the August 20th and 22nd for the FirstNet board members and the SIEC grant guidance. So really the next key thing is that SIEC grant process opening up Q1 2013 and then our submission for that grant.
Michael, I don't know if you know the answer, but when the issuance of the RFP occurs to Arizona from FirstNet, do they intend to have all of the sites identified and agreements in place so a decision can be made on the RFP? Or is it going to say, our anticipation is everybody's going to play ball with us when we do this? Because I think that's an important decision point for the state of Arizona to figure out whether or not this RFP is viable or not.
What, in terms of sites that are, I'm trying to get where you say.
They're going to have to have agreements in place with jurisdictions to share sites, most likely, as we talked about a minute ago.
Right.
Are they going to negotiate those before issuing us an RFP so we have a solid cost model to know what we're looking at? Or they intend to say, we would like to acquire 150 sites in Arizona, and here's your RFP, and we'll worry about the logistics after you accept it?
I think it's a 2-part thing, in my mind anyway. Identify the sites so that you know what the coverage is going to be, whether they're shared or not. Okay? And then if you do have possible sharing, that's a separate discussion. Okay? Because I think agreeing between the state of Arizona and FirstNet as to the appropriate level of coverage is the first discussion. And then how it's paid for, whether they're brand new sites or whether they're shared sites is the secondary question. See what I mean?
Yeah, it's just going to be very dangerous to commit to a proposal before you have an agreement in place as to what you're going to get. And that's what I'm afraid we're going to be asked to do as a state, is to commit to vaporware. This is what you might get. You're not guaranteed you're going to get it. We're going to try our best, but we want you to commit to it before you do it.
That is something to watch out for.
And then at what point is it no longer public safety that they're going to sell out to the public to try and get more revenues, and then pretty soon the new internet is on this pipe stream, so it's going to be.
Okay.
Great.
Possibly. Anything is possible. No, I mean, and those are definitely things to watch out for.
It is, because they've got their own infrastructure and they're offering it up, and then pretty soon the pressure's going to be, you have to offer it to the public now to help offset our other costs.
Right.
I think we're a long ways from seeing the RFP, but I think it's things to keep on the radar screen because we've been burned by that same thing in the past of, here's what we can give you, but, oh, by the way, here's what's required, and you haven't agreed to that before you commit to the RFP.
Well, and in my mind anyway, the first thing is to, within the state, agree to the appropriate level of coverage. Step one, what we think we need. And then step two is what we think and how negotiations could or should go in terms of sharing or not, and then come to the table with that. I think there are going to be opportunities for discussions prior to the RFP between FirstNet and the states. And so we'll get a sense at that point of how firm the RFP is going to be or how kind of maybe it's going to be, right? And then we'll start worrying.
A challenge.
Oh, no, it is. It's definitely going to be a challenge because they're faced with, okay, we got to make it cheap enough so people will adopt, but if we make it cheap enough in terms of compared to commercial, we won't have enough money to operate it. So I think we're going to see, I mean, the indications from the preliminary design, high-level conceptual, was to use as much commercial infrastructure as possible, right? And you go, well, okay, there are issues with that in terms of congestion and overload and reliability and so on and so forth. So, but that's why they open it up for comment, so that the FirstNet board can get an education.
Any other comments? Okay. Yeah? Oh. Did I open that door?
Oh, God. Help you out, Dan.
No, but I think you're right on the money. It's very difficult when we don't understand the bandwidth requirements within sectors and things like that to know what the architecture is going to look like. What, how these sectors are going to be built when we talk about, migration into critical voice and things like that. There are more questions than, and we don't even know the questions to ask yet. I think is probably the closest thing to that. This is a new jump into a public-private partnership, which I don't think is inherently bad, but I think has some tread cautiously, lessons learned out of this thing. And this whole thing is pointing towards the, 4G LTE evolution. And I think of our LTE, or really long-term, what's next? What are the requirements behind that? How dynamic is it? This is a real big paradigm shift for public safety, or for government, essentially, to be operating in these markets, or to be operating in any market, frankly. That's kind of an odd thing for us. So, it's an auspicious undertaking. In other words, holy moly, but I think, I don't want to say, I think caution is, and being very deliberate on this thing, because like I said, we're really looking at a bunch of theories. We're trying to build systems and agreements based on theories.
I think I think that's probably the best point is, I don't know that, at least I don't know about me, but the rest, I don't know that we know the right questions to ask. When you don't ask the right questions, sometimes you get served up something that sounds good, and then you commit to it, and then you realize you kind of got the bad end of the deal later.
Yeah, and I agree with that. I mean, the whole LTE priority and QoS model has not been put in place and validated yet in terms of, okay, can you establish preemptive priority and can everybody work well together? I mean, I go back to the early days of PC multitasking operating systems, and some of them did really a bad job of that. But
We're going to be leapfrogging too, if we're in whatever our population at the moment is, 4G, we're going to be leapfrogging as things develop in the line. So if we're 5 years out to develop something that's now 3 years in obsolescence, so it's a real dynamic issue. And I really applaud people like Michael who got suckered. I mean, God, the people who got involved in this and are going to be involved in it one way or another. This is a huge undertaking, but it's got a ton of support from every part, a ton of money behind it. So,
on the other hand, my take is I'd rather FirstNet take off on this process and the state try to go go by itself.
Yeah, absolutely.
I mean, we don't have, I'm sorry, like I say, we don't have the education to do this.
I know.
You can only hope that FirstNet collectively, nationwide.
I don't know, that whole opt-in, opt-out conversation just seemed to be folly. There's no way to opt out of this thing.
Dan, I know you're engaged with the national, are the national organizations, are they grasping this, in your opinion, the IAFF, the IACP, the, NPSbn, are these groups really?
I think, you've got Harlan Kunis and all these people who are representative of that. Some of them are in FirstNet, or if they're not, they're in the hallway of FirstNet.
Right.
And so, yeah, the IACP and certainly IAFC, what's the county organization, yeah, they're very much part of this.
And I've been really involved with Npsbn, and they come up with the same issues and questions and just unknowns that are out there on this thing, so we're not alone.
All right, thanks, Michael. I can hardly wait for the next update.
The next saga.
And I don't mean to be rude. Thank you very much. That is,
I can take.
I'm glad you're doing it.